Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the sources you share and, well, we really dig in to find out what matters.
Yeah, cutting through the noise, getting to the core information.
Exactly. And today, we've got something pretty interesting lined up. You sent over some material on a novel cannabinoid, THCH, tetrahydrocannabihexol.
That's the one.
And there's quite a bit of buzz about its properties, apparently quite surprising ones. So let's get into it.
Sounds good. And it's always great exploring these new areas, especially when the material comes directly from you, our listeners. So really, thank you for sharing these sources.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's contributions like these from the community that honestly make these deep dives work. They add so much value.
Couldn't agree more.
And speaking of value, if you do find this deep dive helpful as we sort of sift through the information, we'd really appreciate it if you'd consider liking, sharing, and subscribing.
Definitely helps us keep doing this.
It does. And Iseni appreciates everyone who's tuning in for these information deep dives.
Okay, so mission for today. Let's pull the key facts from these sources you sent. We need to understand what THCH actually is, why it's different, and why all the attention.
Right.
Let's start right at the basics. What is THCH?
Okay. So fundamentally, THCH is classified as a phytocannabinoid. The sources we looked at trace its formal discovery, let's say, back to 2019. A team in Italy.
Italy. Okay.
Now, here's the thing. It is found naturally in the cannabis plant.
Right.
But, and this is important, only in really, really tiny trace amounts.
Okay, so a phytocannabinoid like THC or CBD, naturally occurring,
Right.
but probably not enough to extract commercially from the plant itself.
That's exactly it.
Right.
And the buzz isn't just that it exists, it's down to its actual structure. The key difference the sources point to is in its side chain.
Side chain.
Yeah. So most people know Delta-9 THC, right? The main psychoactive one. It has a 5-carbon side chain. THCH, though, has a longer one. It's got an N-hexyl side chain, which means 6 carbons.
Okay, let's unpack this. One extra carbon. Why does that make such a big difference? Seems tiny.
It does seem tiny, but structurally it's significant. That slightly longer 6-carbon chain, well, it's believed to be the reason THCH can attach to the CB1 receptors in your brain more effectively.
More effectively than Delta-9.
Yeah, with greater affinity. The sources mention something like 10% greater affinity compared to Delta-9 THC.
And those CB1 receptors, they're the main ones for the psychoactive effects, mood, pain.
Exactly. They're crucial for mediating those psychoactive effects, influencing mood, pain perception, all that. So a stronger connection, a tighter bind to those receptors. That's the mechanism researchers think explains why THCH could have a much more pronounced effect.
Right, so it's not just present, it interacts differently. That's fascinating. A tiny molecular tweak, one carbon, stronger binding, leading to potentially much higher potency.
Potentially, yeah.
But you said it's only found in trace amounts naturally, so where are these THCH products coming from, the ones people might see?
That's a really critical point the sources make. Because it's so scarce naturally, most of the THCH you find commercially available, well, it isn't extracted from cannabis plants.
Let's go carefully.
It's overwhelmingly produced synthetically in a lab.
Synthetic, okay. So manufactured, how does that work? What do the sources say about the process?
They describe a chemical modification process. Often they start with CBD that's been extracted from legal hemp.
Okay.
And the main reaction they use is called terpenylation. Basically, it involves combining a specific kind of compound, a resorcinol.
Resorcinol.
Yeah, one that already has the desired carbon chain length built into its structure, and they combine that with a terpene derivative.
Huh. So they aren't just like tacking an extra carbon onto THC, they're building it with that 6-carbon chain from a specific starting material.
Precisely. According to the chemists mentioned in the sources, it's all about picking the right precursor molecule. For THCH, you use hexyl resorcinol. That gives you the 6-carbon chain you need.
And is this specific to THCH, or is this like a common technique now for making these newer cannabinoids?
Good question. And this is where the sources sort of connect THCH to the bigger picture of all these new cannabinoids popping up.
Right, there are quite a few now.
Yeah, they explain that this same terpenylation process, it's used to make others too, like THCV, THCB, THCBP. The difference is just which resorcinol they start with.
Because that determines the final chain length.
Exactly. So for THCV, they'd use propyl resorcinol, that's 3 carbons. For THCB, butyl resorcinol, 4 carbons. And for THCP, the one researchers found that might be even more potent than THCH.
Yeah.
For that, they use heptyl resorcinol, which has a 7-carbon chain.
Okay. So it's almost like molecular engineering. Chemists can sort of design these cannabinoids by picking this starting resorcinol to get a specific chain length, maybe aiming for certain effects or potency.
That's a good way to put it. It's intentional synthesis, not just finding something rare in the plant. It's a method to create these tailored compounds that you just can't get easily from extraction.
Which, naturally, leads to the big question. What are the effects like? How potent is THCH really? What are people actually reporting?
Yeah, the potency question. Given that structure, that binding affinity, does it translate?
Does it feel different, more intense?
Well, based on the sources, it certainly seems like it. The researchers who first identified THCH, they actually considered it the second most psychoactive cannabinoid they'd found.
Second only to THCP.
Second only to THCP, yeah.
Wow. Okay, second most psychoactive. What does that actually feel like for someone using it based on, user reports?
The anecdotal reports described in the sources, they consistently mention effects that are intense and pretty fast-acting, feeling significantly stronger than regular Delta-9 THC.
How much stronger are we talking?
Well, the estimates vary. Some sources mention suggestions, maybe based on that binding affinity mostly, that it could be anywhere from 10 to maybe even 25 times stronger than Delta-9.
25 times.
Potentially. But, the sources are also careful to add that binding affinity doesn't always translate perfectly one-to-one into subjective highness for everyone.
Right, individual experience varies. But here's where it gets really interesting. Beyond just stronger, what's the quality of the experience described? What's the feeling?
User accounts often talk about a really profound sense of euphoria. Deep relaxation, too, both like mind and body. An intense body high seems to be a common theme.
Okay.
But what also really stands out in the reports is the duration, how long the effects last.
Longer than usual.
Apparently, yeah. Where a Delta-9 high might last, a couple of hours, depending on how you took it?
Right.
Users report THCH effects lasting notably longer, sometimes twice as long, maybe even more. If you're talking edibles or tinctures, the sources mention effects could potentially last up to, say, 4 to 8 hours.
4 to 8 hours, that's significant.
It is. So the picture painted is something that's not just powerful, but also has serious legs, lasting much longer than many people are used to.
Okay, so it hits hard, lasts long, according to users. What about the other side? Any potential benefits being discussed? Therapeutic uses.
Right, the potential upside. This is a really crucial point, and the sources are very clear here. THCH itself has not undergone any specific medical studies yet.
None at all.
None specifically looking at its therapeutic benefits in humans. So any talk about benefits right now, it's not based on clinical trials of THCH.
So where does that talk come from then?
It's speculative, really. It's based on the fact that THCH is structurally similar to Delta-9 THC. It's a tetrahydrocannabinol, and Delta-9 has been studied for decades, right?
Just extensively.
So because of D9's known properties, researchers basically guess or hypothesize that THCH might show similar effects. It's an extrapolation.
Okay, extrapolation. And what are those potential benefits they're guessing it might have based on the D9 link?
Based on those similarities, the sources list things you might expect. Potential appetite stimulation,
Right.
The munchies, possible pain relief, so analgesic properties, maybe neuroprotective effects, anti-inflammatory action, antiemetic effects, which is helping with nausea and vomiting,
Okay.
and maybe mood elevation or some anti-anxiety properties.
And this seems really important. These are all potential, based on comparison, not proven for THCH itself.
Yeah.
The sources stress that.
Absolutely. They stress it strongly. The need for actual targeted research on THCH is critical before anyone can say for sure if it has these benefits.
Got it. Okay, so given the potency and the lack of specific research, that brings us to the flip side.
Yeah.
The risks, side effects. What do the sources say about potential downsides?
Yeah, very important, especially with something reported to be this strong and still relatively new. The sources list potential risks, noting they're more likely at high doses or for people who are just sensitive to cannabinoids generally.
Makes sense.
Psychologically, you could be looking at increased anxiety, maybe paranoia, and in more severe cases, or again, with high doses, maybe even hallucinations.
Hallucinations. That sounds serious.
It can be. And physically, you might get the more common things like increased heart rate, dizziness, dry mouth, red eyes. And like other potent cannabinoids, there's also the potential for dependence with long-term or heavy use.
The psychological ones, anxiety, paranoia, hallucinations, those stand out.
They do. And the sources actually give a pretty stark real-world example from Japan.
Oh yeah, what happened there?
There were reports of severe adverse reactions linked to THCH use, including people being hospitalized because of hallucinations and even loss of consciousness.
Wow.
And that led directly to Japan designating THCH as a controlled substance. Basically made it illegal there.
So that really highlights the risks.
It really does. It underlines the need for caution, especially when you combine the high potency with limited scientific data and, frankly, patchy regulation in many places. The sources strongly advise talking to a doctor before even thinking about using something like this.
Which flows right into the whole legal question. Where does THCH actually stand? Sounds like it could be messy.
It is definitely messy, a real patchwork, especially if you're looking at the U.S.
Okay, how so?
Well, federally, technically, if the THCH is derived from hemp that meets the Farm Bill criteria, meaning no more than 0.3% Delta-9 THC by dry weight, then it's generally considered legal under that 2018 Farm Bill framework.
Okay, so federally, maybe okay if it's from hemp, but that's never the whole story, is it?
Absolutely not. And the sources really hammer this point home. Federal legality is just one layer. State and local laws are all over the place.
So states can ban it even if it's technically Farm Bill compliant.
Yes. Many states have either specifically banned or are actively regulating or restricting these psychoactive hemp derivatives. That includes semi-synthetics like THCH. The sources list quite a few states where these compounds are effectively illegal or heavily restricted, regardless of the federal situation.
So bottom line, you absolutely have to check your specific state and maybe even local laws. Federal status doesn't guarantee anything.
Precisely. It's essential. What about internationally? What did the sources say?
Internationally, it's often ambiguous or, like Japan, explicitly controlled. In places like the UK or Germany, the sources suggest it's kind of unclear. THCH might not be named specifically, but its psychoactive nature could mean it falls under broader laws covering new psychoactive substances.
So, ambiguous there.
Right. And then, as we said, Japan took decisive action, controlled substance, illegal.
So yeah, definitely not a straightforward legal picture anywhere, really. You need to do your homework on local rules.
No kidding. Okay, so assuming someone is in a place where it's legal, how would they typically find it? What kinds of products are out there with THCH, according to the sources?
The sources mentioned a few common ways it shows up. Vite cartridges and those disposable vape pens are pretty common. Often they contain THCH blended with other cannabinoids that are more widely available, like Delta-8 or HHC, Delta-10.
Blends, okay. What else?
Edibles are out there, especially gummies. Tinctures, too, the oils you put under your tongue. And also concentrates, sometimes called dabs. The sources note those offer a particularly powerful high.
Right, concentrates usually do. Now, given that it's often synthetic, sometimes blended, reportedly very potent, does this raise red flags about, like, product quality, safety, testing?
Oh, absolutely. And this is a huge point the sources emphasize again and again. The importance of reliable, independent, third-party lab testing for these products. It's critical.
Why is it so necessary? What should that testing cover?
Well, several key things according to the sources. First, obviously, potency. You need accurate testing to know how much THCH and other cannabinoids are actually in there, so you understand the strength.
Makes sense.
Second, purity and safety. This means checking for nasty stuff, residual solvents from the synthesis, heavy metals, pesticides, any other adulterants, things you definitely don't want.
Right, contaminants.
Exactly. And third is compliance, making sure the product meets whatever regulations do exist, whether that's state cannabis rules or federal hemp standards like the Delta-9 limit.
So a good lab report isn't just the THCH percentage, it's a full safety profile too.
Ideally, yes. The sources talk about the range of tests labs offer now. It goes beyond just cannabinoids. They mention testing for cannabis, hemp, even things like mushrooms, kratom-infused drinks.
Well, broad range.
Yeah, and for cannabinoid products specifically, they list different test panels. Potency, sure, but also terpene profiles, full purity and safety analysis, specific tests for beverages, and compliance packages tailored for different rules, like Florida's cannabis regs, or USDA hemp rules, or national hemp product standards.
It sounds like any brand that's serious about selling THCH responsibly really needs to invest heavily in this kind of thorough third-party testing.
That is the crystal clear message from the sources. Reliable testing from an accredited independent lab. It's presented as absolutely essential for showing quality, safety, and frankly, legitimacy, especially with novel, potent, synthesized compounds like THCH.
Okay, so what does this all mean if we pull all these threads together?
Right, the big picture. What we're seeing with THCH is it's a recently identified cannabinoid. It's mostly made synthetically, not really extracted. It's gotten a lot of attention because it's reportedly very potent, much more so than Delta-9 THC, with strong, long-lasting psychoactive effects based on user reports.
With unproven benefits and definite risks.
Exactly. Potential benefits are speculated based on D9 research, but they're not proven for THCH. And there are documented risks and side effects, especially with high doses, highlighted by things like what happened in Japan. The legal status is complicated, varies hugely by location.
And testing is crucial.
And because it's synthetic and potent, rigorous third-party lab testing is presented as absolutely vital for safety and transparency if you're looking at commercial products.
It really just drives home how fast everything is moving in the cannabinoid world, doesn't it? New compounds discovered, synthesized, hitting the market so quickly.
It really does. Which leads to, I think, a pretty important question for you, the listener, to maybe chew on after this. With novel cannabinoids like THCH, THCP, THCV, all these others emerging so rapidly, often through synthesis, how effectively can regulation and safety protocols actually keep pace? How do we make sure consumers are properly informed and protected?
Yes, a really good question to end on, something to definitely think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into THCH today.
And thank you again for sending in the sources and for tuning in. Seriously, if you found this discussion valuable, please do think about liking, sharing, subscribing. It genuinely helps us keep exploring these complex topics together.